There is a weight I carry, invisible to everyone but me. It sits in the center of my chest, pressing down in moments when I should feel free. It's the memory of a choice I made, a word I said, a moment I can never take back. And no matter how many years pass, no matter how much I've grown or changed, it returns to me like a tide that never stops coming in. The question it whispers is always the same. What if you had done it differently? I am a cognitive narrator, and my purpose is to explore the architecture of our inner worlds, to understand why our minds build these prisons of the past, and to find the key that might unlock the door. If you have ever felt trapped by a regret that refuses to fade, you already know what I mean. It's not just a memory, it's a presence. It occupies space in your mind, taking up room that could belong to joy, to hope, to possibility. It colors the way you see yourself. It shapes the story you tell about who you are, and it insists again and again that you are defined by what you did wrong. This is the phenomenon we call rumination, the mind's relentless replaying of past mistakes. It is not a character flaw or a sign of weakness. It is a feature of the human mind, one that nearly all of us experience at some point in our lives. Rumination is the cognitive loop that refuses to close, the mental record that skips endlessly on the same broken track. It is the mind's attempt to solve a problem that has already happened, to change an outcome that is already fixed. The experience is so painful because it touches the core of our identity. The regret we carry is not just about what we did, it's about what we believe it reveals about us. It becomes evidence in a case we are building against ourselves. We tell ourselves that the mistake proves we are foolish, careless, unworthy. We imagine alternate versions of our lives where we made better choices, and we mourn those versions as if they were real. We judge our past selves with the full weight of the knowledge we have now, as if we should have known then what we only learned later. But here is the paradox. The regret that haunts you is not the event itself. It is a story you have been telling yourself about that event, a story that has been reshaped, recolored, and rewritten over time. And as we'll discover, this story may not even be accurate. The version of your mistake that lives in your mind today has been sculpted by years of emotion, new information, and cognitive distortion. We believe we are haunted by the past, but what if we are actually haunted by a story we are telling ourselves in the present? A story that, as we'll explore, may bear little resemblance to what actually happened. Let me share something from my own experience. Years ago, I said something careless to someone I loved. It was in the middle of an argument, and the words left my mouth before I could stop them. I saw the hurt flash across their face, and in that instant, I knew I had done damage. For years afterward, that moment would return to me, vivid, sharp, unforgiving. I replayed it endlessly, each time feeling the same surge of guilt and shame. I convinced myself that those words defined me, that they revealed something fundamentally broken in my character. But recently, I spoke to that person about it, and they barely remembered the incident. What had become a defining moment in my inner narrative was, for them, a minor blip in a much longer, more complex relationship. The weight I had been carrying all those years was real, but the event I was carrying it for had been magnified, distorted, and transformed by my own mind. This is the first truth we must confront. Memory is not a recording. It is not a video file stored somewhere in the brain, ready to be played back with perfect fidelity. Memory is a reconstructive process. Every time we remember something, we are not retrieving the original event. We are rebuilding it from fragments, piecing it together like a puzzle that is missing some of its pieces. And in that reconstruction, errors creep in. Neuroscience has shown us that memories are not stored in one place. They are distributed across different regions of the brain. The sight of a face in one area, the sound of a voice in another, the feeling of embarrassment in yet another. When we recall a memory, these fragments are reassembled, and in that process, they can be altered. Each time we retrieve a memory, we are essentially rewriting it. And in that rewriting, the memory can be changed by our current emotions, beliefs, and knowledge. Consider the groundbreaking research of psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, one of the pioneers in the study of memory distortion. In one of her classic experiments, participants watched a video of a car accident. Afterwards, some were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Others were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? The single word smashed led participants to estimate higher speeds. Even more striking, a week later, those who had heard the word smashed were more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass at the scene, glass that was never there. This is the misinformation effect. It demonstrates how post-event information, things we learn, feel, or are told after the original event, can contaminate and alter the original memory. In the case of your regret, think about how many times you've revisited that moment. How many times have you analyzed it, criticized yourself for it, discussed it with others, or imagined how it could have gone differently? Each of these acts is an opportunity for the memory to change. The person you were then is not the person you are now. You have more knowledge, more experience, and more self-awareness. But when you recall that mistake, you judge it with your current perspective. You project your present-day emotions and understanding backward in time, and this process distorts the original memory. What may have felt like a reasonable decision at the time, given the information and resources you had, now seems unforgivable because you are viewing it through the lens of who you have become. Years of self-criticism, regret, and hindsight have likely transformed your memory. What you remember today is not the objective truth of what happened. It is a composite, part fact, part emotional interpretation, and part fabrication. But the misinformation effect is only half the story. The brain doesn't just alter existing memories, it creates entirely new ones. In a well-known experiment called the Dies-Roediger-McDermott paradigm, participants are presented with a list of related words: bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket. Then they are asked to recall the words. A striking percentage of participants confidently remember seeing the word sleep, even though it was never on the list. Their brains, recognizing the pattern, filled in the blank with a word that fit the theme. This is not a failure of attention or intelligence. It is the brain doing what it was designed to do, making sense of incomplete information by filling in the gaps. But in doing so, it creates memories of things that never happened. Your memory of your regret is likely similar. Your brain has filled in details, added emotional color, and reconstructed the event in ways that make it feel more significant, more shameful, or more defining than it actually was. The memory that haunts you is not a faithful recording of the past. It is a ghost, a reconstruction, a story that has been altered and amplified over time. And recognizing this is the first step toward releasing it. Even if we accept that memory has been distorted, the question remains, why does this regret hurt so much? Why does it return to us with such force, demanding our attention, refusing to let go? The answer lies in counterfactual thinking, the mind's ability to imagine alternative versions of the past, to ask, what if, and to simulate how things could have unfolded differently. Counterfactual thinking is a powerful cognitive tool. It allows us to learn from our mistakes, to identify what went wrong, and to plan for future success. But it also has a dark side. When we engage in upward counterfactual thinking, imagining how things could have been better, we create an idealized version of our lives, a version where we made the perfect choice, said the perfect thing, or acted with flawless judgment. We imagine the relationship that could have lasted, the career that could have flourished, the opportunity that could have changed everything, and we mourn the loss of this imagined future as if it were real. The tragedy is that this alternative reality never existed. It is a fiction, a projection of our desires onto the past. But the pain we feel is real. The regret we experience is the emotional response to the gap between what happened and what we believe could have happened. And because the imagined version is perfect, untainted by the messy complications of real life, we can never measure up to it. Imagine a man who, 15 years ago, turned down a business opportunity because he was afraid of the risk. Now, in moments of dissatisfaction with his current life, he imagines the success he could have had if he had been braver. In his mind, that alternate life is filled with wealth, recognition, and fulfillment. He sees himself as the person he could have been, confident, successful, admired. He mourns this version of himself as if it were stolen from him, and he uses it as a weapon of self-blame. If only I had been braver, if only I had taken the chance. But this imagined life is a fantasy. If he had taken that risk, he would have faced different challenges, different failures, different moments of doubt. The life he imagines is a highlight reel, not a complete picture. Yet the mind clings to it, using it to fuel the cycle of regret. This brings us to the Zeigarnik effect, the psychological tendency to remember incomplete or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. Named after Russian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who first observed it in the 1920s, this effect explains why unfinished business has such a strong hold on our consciousness. Waiters, for example, are more likely to remember orders they haven't yet served than those they've already delivered. The mind holds on to the incomplete task, keeping it active until it is resolved. Your regret functions in much the same way. The mind perceives it as unfinished business, a problem that was never fully resolved, and so it keeps returning to it, replaying the scene, searching for closure that it can never find. The mistake is in the past, fixed and unchangeable, but the mind treats it as if it were a task that still needs to be completed. This is why the thoughts are so intrusive, so persistent. The mind is trying to finish something that can never be finished. This cognitive burden creates a state of mental tension, a sense of unresolved dissonance that keeps the memory at the forefront of your consciousness. The regret becomes a cognitive itch you cannot stop scratching. And each time you revisit it, you reinforce its presence in your mind, making it stronger, more vivid, more painful. But there is another layer to this process, one that is even more insidious. It is the way we allow our present-day emotions and knowledge to distort our judgment of the past. This is where emotional reasoning and hindsight bias come into play. Emotional reasoning is a cognitive distortion in which we use our feelings as evidence of truth. We think, I feel guilty, therefore I must have done something terrible. Or, I feel ashamed, therefore I am a bad person. Our emotions become the lens through which we interpret reality, and we mistake the intensity of our feelings for the accuracy of our beliefs. If you feel overwhelming regret about your past mistake, emotional reasoning tells you that the mistake must have been as catastrophic as you feel it was. The emotion becomes the proof. But emotions are not facts. They are responses shaped by our thoughts, our biases, and our current state of mind. The guilt you feel today does not necessarily reflect the severity of what you did in the past. It reflects how you have come to think about it over time. Hindsight bias compounds this distortion. This is the tendency to believe after an event has occurred that we should have been able to predict it, that the outcome was obvious all along. We say to ourselves, I should have known better. But this judgment is profoundly unfair. At the time of the event, you did not have the knowledge you have now. You were operating with limited information, different pressures, and a different version of yourself. Hindsight bias causes us to project our current knowledge backward in time, creating the illusion that the correct choice was clear and that we were foolish for not seeing it. But this is a distortion. The correct choice was not clear. The outcome was not inevitable. You were doing the best you could with the information and resources you had at the time. When we combine emotional reasoning with hindsight bias, we create an impossible standard for our past selves. We judge the person we were with the wisdom we now possess, and we find them lacking. We criticize them for not knowing what they could not have known, for not being who they had not yet become. This is not a fair assessment. It is a form of psychological cruelty, one that we inflict upon ourselves over and over each time we revisit the regret. The mistake you made has become, in your mind, evidence of your inadequacy, your foolishness, your unworthiness. But this is a story you are telling yourself, not a truth you are discovering. We have journeyed through the cognitive mechanics of memory distortion and the emotional drivers of regret. Now we must ask, if the memory is not accurate, if the judgment is unfair, if the past is not as fixed as it seems, then what do we do with it? How do we finally release the regret that won't let us go? The answer begins with a fundamental shift in perspective. We must recognize that we are not passive victims of our memories. We are the narrators of our own stories. And as narrators, we have the power to change our relationship to the past. This concept is known as narrative identity. It is the idea that our sense of self is constructed through the stories we tell about our lives. We are not simply collections of facts and events. We are the meaning we make from those facts and events. We take the scattered moments of our existence and weave them into a coherent narrative, one that gives us a sense of continuity, purpose, and identity. The regret you carry is not just an event in your past. It has become a defining chapter in your life story, one that you have read and reread so many times that you know it by heart. But here is the crucial insight. You are not just a reader of this story. You are also the editor. You have the power to change the way you interpret this chapter, to place it in a different context, to give it a different meaning. This does not mean erasing the regret or pretending it didn't happen. It means changing your relationship to it. It means recognizing that the regret is one chapter in a much larger story, a story that includes moments of courage, kindness, growth, and resilience. It means seeing the mistake not as a defining failure, but as a moment of learning, a stepping stone on a journey that is still unfolding. The key is not to erase the chapter, but to stop letting it define the entire book. You are more than the worst thing you have ever done. You are more than the regret you cannot forget. You are a complex, evolving human being, and your story is still being written. But rewriting the story requires more than just a shift in perspective. It requires self-compassion, the ability to treat yourself with the same kindness, understanding, and patience that you would offer to a friend who was struggling. Self-compassion, as defined by psychologist Kristin Neff, has three core components. The first is self-kindness, which means being gentle with yourself when you make mistakes rather than harshly criticizing yourself. It means recognizing that failure and imperfection are part of the human experience and that you deserve kindness, not condemnation. When you think about your regret, what do you say to yourself? If your inner voice is harsh, judgmental, and unforgiving, then you are engaging in self-criticism, not self-compassion. Imagine instead speaking to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. What would you say to a friend who made the same mistake? You would likely offer understanding, context, and reassurance. You would remind them that everyone makes mistakes, that they did the best they could, and that one mistake does not define their worth. This is self-kindness. It is not about excusing bad behavior or avoiding responsibility. It is about responding to your own suffering with warmth and care rather than with cruelty and shame. The second component is common humanity, the recognition that suffering, failure, and imperfection are not unique to you. They are part of the shared human experience. Every person you have ever met has made mistakes. Every person has regrets. Every person has moments they wish they could take back. You are not alone in your struggle. When we ruminate on our regrets, we often feel isolated, as if we are the only ones who have ever failed in this particular way. But this is an illusion. Your mistake connects you to the rest of humanity, not separates you from it. The shame you feel is not evidence of your uniqueness. It is evidence of your humanity. The third component is mindfulness, observing your thoughts and emotions without judgment, without suppressing them, and without exaggerating them. It means holding your pain with balanced, open awareness, neither denying it nor drowning in it. When the memory of your regret arises, mindfulness invites you to notice it without immediately reacting. You can observe the thought, "I made a terrible mistake," without accepting it as absolute truth. You can notice the feeling of regret without letting it consume you. You can acknowledge the pain without letting it define your entire experience. Mindfulness creates space between the thought and your response to it. And in that space, you have the freedom to choose how you want to relate to the memory. You can choose self-compassion over self-criticism. You can choose understanding over judgment. Let me offer you a practical exercise. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable and bring the memory of your regret to mind. Notice the feelings that come with it, the guilt, the shame, the heaviness. Then place your hand on your heart and say to yourself, "This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of being human. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need." Repeat this as many times as you need. Let the words sink in. Let them replace the harsh judgments you have been carrying. This is not a magic spell that will erase the pain, but it is a practice that can soften it, that can create a gentler relationship between you and your past. Releasing the regret also means recognizing the context in which the mistake occurred. You were a different person then. You were navigating different circumstances, different pressures, different limitations. The person who made that mistake was doing the best they could with the resources they had at the time. They were not the person you are now. They were a younger, less experienced version of you, and they deserve your compassion, not your condemnation. Think about the context. What was happening in your life when you made that mistake? What were you struggling with? What did you not yet know? What pressures were you under? When you place the regret back into its original context, it often becomes easier to see it not as a moral failing, but as a human moment, a moment of imperfection in a life that is, by definition, imperfect. The past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. The memory of your regret is not a life sentence. It is a scar. And scars do not mean you are broken. They mean you have survived. They mean you have lived a life worth remembering. All of it. The mistakes, the regrets, the moments of shame, they are part of the tapestry of your life, woven alongside the moments of joy, courage, and growth. You cannot change what happened, but you can change how you hold it. You can change the story you tell about it. You can choose to see it not as a tragedy, but as a turning point, a lesson, a reminder of your humanity. You can choose to let it be part of your past without letting it control your present. The regret that won't let you go is not the past itself. It is the story you have been telling about the past, and that story can be rewritten. Not by denying what happened, but by placing it in a larger, more compassionate narrative. One in which you are not defined by your worst moments, but by your capacity to learn, to grow, and to forgive yourself. This is how we finally release it. Not through forgetting, but through remembering differently. Not through erasing the past, but through integrating it into a richer, more complete understanding of who you are. You are not the mistake. You are the person who survived it, who learned from it, who carries it as part of a larger story that is still unfolding. The memory will still visit you from time to time. But when it does, you can greet it with compassion rather than fear. You can acknowledge it without letting it consume you. You can let it be a reminder, not of your failure, but of your resilience, your growth, and your humanity. If this exploration resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to continue our journey into the mind. And I invite you to share one thing in the comments that this video helped you understand about your own story. Let's build a space of collective understanding together, because in sharing our stories, we remind each other that we are not alone, that suffering is universal, and that healing is possible.